The ice cracked beneath Flora Harrington's boots with a sound like a gunshot echoing across the frozen lake, and in that split second before the world tilted sideways, she knew she was about to die. The winter of 1883 had come hard and fast to the mountains surrounding Jerome, Arizona, a copper mining town perched precariously on Cleopatra Hill. Most folks thought Arizona was nothing but scorching desert and sun-bleached bones, but up here in the high country, winter transformed the landscape into something altogether different. The small lake on the outskirts of town, fed by mountain springs, had frozen over during an unusually bitter cold snap that had descended from the north, bringing temperatures that made old-timers shake their heads and mutter about the end of days. Flora had been foolish to venture out onto the ice. She knew that now, in the terrible clarity that comes with impending disaster. At 22 years old, she should have had better sense, but desperation had a way of making people do reckless things. Her younger brother Timothy had lost his hat, the only warm one he owned, and she had seen it sitting there on the ice, perhaps 20 feet from shore, likely blown there during the previous night's wind. The hat had belonged to their father before he died in a mining accident 2 years prior, and Timothy treasured it above all his possessions. The ice had seemed solid enough near the shore. Flora had tested it carefully, listening for the telltale groans and creaks that would signal danger. But she had miscalculated. The center of the lake, where the springs fed in from below, never froze as thick as the rest. She had been reaching for the hat, her fingers just brushing the worn felt when the world shattered beneath her. The cold hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. She plunged down into water so frigid it felt like knives slicing through every inch of her skin. Her heavy wool skirt and coat, which had provided blessed warmth moments before, now dragged her down like anchors. She tried to scream, but icy water rushed into her mouth, choking her. Her arms flailed, seeking purchase on the ice shelf, but her fingers were already going numb, refusing to obey her desperate commands. Through the distorted lens of water and panic, she could see the pale winter sun above, fractured and distant. This was how it ended then. She would die here, in this frozen lake, and Timothy would lose not just his hat but his only sister. Their mother had passed when Timothy was born, and now he would be truly alone in the world. The thought filled her with a grief more profound than the cold. Then something changed. A shadow fell across the ice above her, dark and solid. Flora's dimming vision made out the shape of a man, his form bent low. She tried to reach up, but her arms felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and unresponsive. The edges of her vision were going gray, and she knew she had only seconds left before the cold pulled her down into a sleep from which she would never wake. A hand plunged through the broken ice, then another. Strong fingers locked around her wrist with a grip like iron. She felt herself being hauled upward with a strength that seemed almost superhuman. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, drawing in precious air along with droplets of icy water that made her cough and choke. The hands pulled her up onto the ice, dragging her across its treacherous surface toward the shore. "Hold on," a deep voice commanded, rough with exertion. "Just hold on." Flora could not have let go if she wanted to. Her body had gone beyond her control, seized up with cold and shock. She was dimly aware of being pulled across the ice, then onto the snowy bank. The man hauled her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all, and began running toward town, his boots crunching through the snow with urgent rhythm. "Stay awake," he ordered, his breath coming in white puffs in the frigid air. "Do you hear me? You need to stay awake." Flora tried to respond, but her teeth were chattering so violently she could not form words. She looked up at the man carrying her and saw a face carved from granite, all hard angles and sharp edges, with eyes the color of storm clouds. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair visible beneath his wide-brimmed hat and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. A cowboy, she thought distantly, noting his worn leather vest and the gun belt at his hip. But what was a cowboy doing this far north, in mining country? He kicked open the door of the nearest building, which happened to be the general store, run by Mrs. Henderson, a widow who had known Flora since childhood. The elderly woman looked up from her counter, her eyes widening in horror at the sight of Flora's blue-tinged skin and soaking wet clothes. "Dear God in heaven!" Mrs. Henderson gasped. "Flora, what happened?" "She went through the ice," the cowboy said tersely, already carrying Flora toward the pot-bellied stove that radiated warmth in the corner. "We need to get her out of these wet clothes and warmed up now. Do you have blankets? Dry clothing?" Mrs. Henderson sprang into action with surprising speed for a woman of her advanced years. "In the back room. Set her down here by the stove. I will get what we need." The cowboy lowered Flora carefully onto a chair near the stove, then began working at the buttons of her coat with fingers that moved with surprising dexterity. Flora wanted to protest, wanted to say she could manage herself, but her hands would not cooperate. She could barely feel them at all. "Your lips are blue," the cowboy said, his voice gentler now. "Your whole face is blue. You were under for too long." Mrs. Henderson returned with an armful of blankets and what looked like one of her own dresses. "Out with you now," she told the cowboy firmly. "I will tend to the girl." "She needs to warm up gradually," the cowboy said, not moving. "Too fast and it can stop her heart. I have seen it happen before." "Where did you see such a thing?" Mrs. Henderson demanded, even as she began helping Flora out of her frozen coat. "Montana. I worked cattle up near the Canadian border for 3 winters. Lost a man once because we warmed him too quick after he fell through a river." The cowboy's jaw tightened at the memory. "Keep her near the stove, but not too near. Warm water, not hot. Get her to drink something warm if you can." "I know how to tend to someone with exposure, young man," Mrs. Henderson said tartly, but there was approval in her eyes. "You did well pulling her out. Another minute and we would be planning a funeral." The cowboy's expression darkened. He looked at Flora, who was watching him through half-closed eyes, still shivering so hard the chair rattled beneath her. "You going to be all right, miss?" Flora managed a tiny nod. She wanted to thank him, to tell him he had saved her life, but the words would not come. Her whole body felt like it was on fire now, painful pins and needles radiating through every limb as sensation slowly returned. "What is your name?" Mrs. Henderson asked the cowboy as she wrapped a blanket around Flora's shoulders. "I have not seen you in Jerome before." "Warren Lansing," he replied. "Just arrived yesterday. I am looking for work." "Warren Lansing. Mrs." Henderson repeated thoughtfully. "Well, Mr. Lansing, you have done this town a great service today. Flora here works as a teacher for our children. She is much beloved. Her brother will want to thank you personally, I am sure." Warren glanced at Flora again, something unreadable passing across his face. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was almost courtly. "No thanks necessary, madam. Anyone would have done the same." "But they did not," Mrs. Henderson pointed out. "You did. That makes all the difference." Warren looked uncomfortable with the praise. He moved toward the door, then paused. "You will make sure she is all right? Get the doctor if needed." "Dr. Mitchell will be sent for immediately," Mrs. Henderson assured him. "Now go on with you. Let me tend to the girl in privacy." Warren nodded and left, the door closing softly behind him. Flora watched him go, her mind still foggy but clearing slowly. Warren Lansing. She tucked the name away carefully, knowing she owed this man a debt she could never fully repay. He had reached into freezing water and pulled her out when she was already blue with cold, already slipping away. He had saved her life without hesitation, without knowing who she was or whether she was worth saving. Mrs. Henderson worked efficiently, getting Flora out of her wet clothes and into the dry dress, rubbing her limbs briskly to encourage circulation. She made weak tea with honey and insisted Flora drink it in tiny sips, holding the cup to her lips when Flora's hands shook too badly to manage alone. Gradually, painfully, warmth began to creep back into Flora's body. The blue tinge faded from her skin, replaced by a more normal pink. Her shivers became less violent, though she still trembled. Dr. Mitchell arrived within the hour. a portly man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He examined Flora thoroughly, listening to her lungs and heart, checking her fingers and toes for frostbite. "You are a very lucky young woman," he told her seriously. "A few minutes longer, and we would be having a very different conversation. As it is, you should make a full recovery, though you will feel poorly for a few days." "Timothy," Flora managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. "My brother, he will worry. I will send word to him," Mrs. Henderson promised. "The Lord knows he will give you an earful about going out on that ice." Flora closed her eyes, exhaustion crashing over her now that the immediate danger had passed. "The hat," she murmured. "Did anyone get the hat?" "Hush now," Mrs. Henderson said softly, stroking Flora's damp hair back from her forehead. "Do not worry about hats. Your brother will just be grateful you are alive." But Flora did worry. She worried that she had been so foolish, so careless. She worried about the cost of Dr. Mitchell's visit, money they could ill afford on her teacher's salary. Most of all, she worried about Warren Lansing, the mysterious cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. Who was he? What brought him to Jerome? And how could she ever repay him for what he had done? Timothy arrived shortly after, his young face pale with fear. At 16, he was already nearly 6 feet tall, all gangly limbs and earnest brown eyes that were so like their father's, it sometimes hurt Flora to look at him. He burst through the door of the general store and dropped to his knees beside Flora's chair, taking her hands in his. "Flora, my God, what were you thinking?" His voice cracked with emotion. "Mrs. Henderson said you went through the ice. You could have died." "I know," Flora whispered. "I am sorry, Timothy. I just wanted to get your hat back." Timothy stared at her for a long moment, then his face crumpled. "You nearly died for a hat? Flora, you are all I have. If something happened to you, He could not finish the sentence, overcome with feeling. Flora pulled one hand free and touched his cheek. "But nothing did happen. A man pulled me out. Warren Lansing. Do you know him?" Timothy shook his head. "Never heard the name before today. But I will find him and thank him. I will thank him every day for the rest of my life if need be. He said he just arrived in Jerome yesterday," Mrs. Henderson offered. "Looking for work, from what he told me. He had the look of a cattleman about him." "Not much call for cattle work around here," Timothy said thoughtfully. "This is mining country, but there are a few ranches in the valleys below. Maybe he will find something there." Flora felt a strange flutter in her chest at the thought of Warren Lansing leaving Jerome before she had a chance to properly thank him. She pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to exhaustion and shock. She owed the man her life. Of course she wanted to see him again, to express her gratitude. That was only natural. Dr. Mitchell insisted Flora be taken home and put to bed immediately. Timothy half carried her through the streets of Jerome, drawing curious stares from the townspeople they passed. News traveled fast in a small town, and by the time they reached the small cabin Flora shared with her brother on the outskirts of town, it seemed half of Jerome knew about her mishap on the ice. The cabin was modest, just 2 rooms with a small kitchen and a sleeping loft where Timothy made his bed. Flora's room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a trunk for her clothes, but it was home, and she had never been more grateful to see it. Timothy settled her under several quilts, then stoked the fire until the room was almost uncomfortably warm. "Sleep," he ordered, trying to sound stern, but mostly just looking worried. "I will check on you every hour." Flora wanted to protest that she was fine, that he did not need to fuss, but exhaustion dragged her down into sleep before she could form the words. She dreamed of cold water and ice, of sinking down into darkness, of strong hands pulling her back toward the light. In her dreams, Warren Lansing's storm-gray eyes looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, though she could not say why. She woke several times during the night, disoriented and aching. True to his word, Timothy was there each time, offering her water or adjusting her blankets. His young face creased with concern. Go to sleep, Flora told him during one such visit, her voice stronger now. You need rest too. I will rest when I know you are all right, Timothy replied stubbornly. You would do the same for me. He was right, of course. She would sit up with him all night and all the next day if need be. They were all each other had in this world, and that bond ran deeper than blood, deeper than anything. By morning, Flora felt markedly better. Her body still ached and her throat was raw, but the terrifying numbness had passed. She could move her fingers and toes without difficulty, and when she looked at herself in the small mirror above her wash basin, she was relieved to see that her skin had returned to its normal color. She looked tired and a bit haggard, but decidedly alive. Timothy brought her breakfast in bed, a luxury she never permitted herself. Eggs and toast with coffee strong enough to strip paint. I am going into town today, he announced as she ate. I need to find this Warren Lansing and thank him properly. I should come with you, Flora said immediately. You should stay in bed, Timothy countered. Dr. Mitchell said you need to rest. I cannot rest knowing I have not thanked the man who saved my life, Flora argued. Please, Timothy. I will go mad sitting here doing nothing. Her brother sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. Flora had inherited their father's determination, along with his dark hair and green eyes, and once she made up her mind about something, there was no dissuading her. All right, he conceded, but you will wear every warm thing you own, and if you start feeling poorly, we come straight home. Flora agreed readily to these terms. She dressed with care, choosing her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes. She told herself she was just being respectful, that it had nothing to do with wanting to make a good impression on Warren Lansing. After all, the man had seen her at her absolute worst, blue-faced and half-drowned. Surely he deserved to see that she could look presentable when not in mortal danger. Jerome was a town built on ambition and copper. Perched on the side of a mountain at an elevation of 5,000 feet, it defied logic and geography, a testament to human stubbornness and greed. The streets were steep and narrow, lined with buildings that clung to the hillside at precarious angles. The United Verde mine was the heart of the town, its operations running day and night, filling the air with the sounds of machinery and blasting powder. Flora and Timothy made their way down Main Street, asking after Warren Lansing at each establishment. The barkeep at the saloon shook his head. The proprietor of the boarding house said no one by that name had taken a room. The blacksmith had not seen any strangers matching Warren's description. Flora felt her spirits sinking with each negative response. Had he already moved on? Surely he would not leave without even waiting to see if she survived. They were about to give up when old Pete Morrison, who ran the livery stable, called out to them. You looking for that tall cowboy? Dark-haired fellow with a pearl-handled revolver. Yes, Flora said eagerly. Have you seen him? Sure have. He is staying in my loft, above the horses. Said he did not have money for a proper room yet, so I told him he could sleep there in exchange for mucking out stalls and tending to the animals. Pete grinned, showing several gaps in his yellowed teeth. Smart fellow. Good with horses, too. He has a way with them. The livery stable stood at the lower end of Main Street, a rambling structure that housed perhaps 20 horses at any given time. The smell of hay and manure hung heavy in the air, familiar and oddly comforting. Flora had spent many hours here as a child, when her father would bring her to town and let her pet the horses while he conducted his business. They found Warren in one of the stalls, brushing down a magnificent black gelding with long, steady strokes. He had removed his coat and vest despite the cold, and his shirt was damp with sweat from his labors. He looked up when Flora and Timothy entered, surprise flickering across his face. Miss Harrington, he said, straightening. You are looking much better than when I last saw you. Thanks to you, Flora replied, suddenly feeling unaccountably nervous. In the daylight, without the urgency of crisis driving his actions, Warren Lansing was even more striking than she remembered. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, and the lean, muscular build of a man, accustomed to hard physical labor. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that contrasted with his rough exterior. "I came to thank you properly. You saved my life, Mr. Lansing." Warren looked uncomfortable. He set down the brush and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Like I said yesterday, anyone would have done the same." "But they did not," Timothy interjected, echoing Mrs. Henderson's words from the previous day. "You did. I am Timothy Harrington, Flora's brother. I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You do not owe me anything," Warren said firmly. He looked at Flora, his gray eyes searching her face. "You are truly all right? No lasting harm?" "A bit sore, but otherwise fine," Flora assured him. "The doctor said I should make a full recovery. If you had not been there, if you had not acted so quickly—" Her voice caught, and she had to pause to compose herself. "I would have died, Mr. Lansing. You gave me my life back." Warren shifted his weight, clearly unused to such gratitude. "I was glad I could help," he said simply. "When I saw you go through the ice, I just reacted. Did not think about it much." "That makes what you did even braver," Flora insisted. "You could have fallen through yourself. You could have been pulled under with me. But you did not hesitate." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Warren's mouth. "Well, I did hesitate a little. Just not long enough to talk myself out of it." The admission was so honest, so devoid of false modesty, that Flora found herself smiling back. There was something refreshing about Warren's straightforward manner. He did not posture or preen, did not try to make himself seem larger than life. He had done an extraordinary thing and seemed genuinely puzzled by the fuss being made over it. "Will you let us at least buy you dinner?" Timothy asked. "The restaurant on Main Street serves a decent steak. It is the least we can do." Warren hesitated, and Flora could see him weighing the offer. He had the proud bearing of a man who did not like accepting charity, even when it was deserved. "You do not need to do that," he began. "Please," Flora interrupted. "It would mean a great deal to me. To both of us." Something in her voice must have convinced him, because Warren nodded slowly. "All right, but only if you let me pay my own way." "Absolutely not," Timothy said firmly. "You can argue about a lot of things, Mr. Lansing, but not this." Warren looked like he wanted to argue anyway, but Flora laid a gentle hand on his arm. "Please," she said again, "let us do this small thing. You gave me back my life. The least you can let us do is feed you a meal." Warren's gaze dropped to where Flora's hand rested on his forearm. Even through the fabric of his shirt, she could feel the solid muscle beneath, the warmth of his skin. She pulled her hand back quickly, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture, but not before she saw something flicker in Warren's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or awareness. "All right," he said quietly. "If it means that much to you, I will accept. But just this once." They arranged to meet at the restaurant that evening at 6 o'clock. Warren insisted he needed to finish his work at the livery first, and Flora did not push. She had learned long ago that some people needed to fulfill their obligations before they could accept anything for themselves. It was a matter of pride, of self-respect. She understood that better than most. As they walked back toward their cabin, Timothy chattered excitedly about Warren. "Did you see his gun? That was not some cheap iron. That was quality craftsmanship. And the way he handled that horse like they were old friends. He must be a top-notch cowboy." Flora murmured agreement, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying those moments by the lake, the feeling of Warren's hands gripping her wrists, the determination in his voice when he told her to hold on. He had appeared like something out of a dream, exactly when she needed him most. Some people would call that providence. Others would call it pure chance. Flora did not know what to call it, but she knew she wanted to understand this man better. Who was Warren Lansing? What brought him to Jerome? And why did the memory of his eyes make her pulse quicken in a way she did not entirely understand? The restaurant on Main Street was called the Copper Queen, named after the mine that dominated the town's economy. It was a modest establishment, but clean and well run, known for serving the best beef in Jerome. Flora dressed with even more care than she had that morning, choosing a deep blue dress that her mother had made years ago, the fabric still rich despite its age. She pinned up her dark hair with the silver combs that had been a gift from her father on her 18th birthday, allowing a few curls to frame her face. Timothy whistled when she emerged from her room. "You look like you are going to a fancy ball. Not dinner with a cowboy," he teased. Flora felt her cheeks warm. "I am just trying to look presentable. Is that a crime?" "Not at all," Timothy said, grinning. "Just interesting, that is all." "There is nothing interesting about it," Flora insisted, perhaps a bit too forcefully. "I simply want to show proper respect to the man who saved my life." "If you say so," Timothy replied, but his knowing smile suggested he did not believe her for a moment. Warren was waiting outside the restaurant when they arrived, and Flora was pleased to see he had made an effort as well. His clothes were still simple and well worn, but they were clean, and he had shaved, revealing the strong line of his jaw. He held his hat in his hands, turning it absently, and straightened when he saw them approach. "Miss Harrington, Timothy," he greeted them, his voice formal. "Thank you for the invitation." "Thank you for accepting it," Flora replied. "Shall we go in?" The restaurant was perhaps half full, mostly miners finishing their shifts and townspeople gathering for their evening meals. The owner, a heavy-set Italian woman named Mrs. Rossi, greeted them warmly and showed them to a table near the window. She made a fuss over Flora, having heard about the incident at the lake, and insisted on bringing them her finest wine on the house. "Any man who saves one of our own deserves the best we have to offer," she declared, beaming at Warren. "You eat whatever you like tonight, young man. No charge." Warren started to protest, but Mrs. Rossi waved him off with a flour-dusted hand. "Do not argue with an old woman. You will not win, and it will only give me indigestion. Now what will you have?" They ordered steaks all around, with potatoes and fresh bread. When Mrs. Rossi bustled away to the kitchen, Warren shook his head in bemusement. "Does everyone in this town know what happened?" "Small town," Timothy explained. "News travels faster than a telegraph here. By tomorrow, the story will have grown until you were fighting off a pack of wolves while pulling Flora from the ice." Warren's lips quirked. "Were there wolves? I must have missed them in all the excitement." Flora laughed, surprised by his dry humor. "Next week, someone will claim you dove through solid ice without breaking it. The week after, you will have rescued half the town from certain doom." "I should start charging admission to my heroic deeds," Warren mused. "I could make a fortune." The easy banter relaxed them all. Over dinner, Warren proved to be excellent company. He spoke thoughtfully and listened intently, a rare combination in Flora's experience. Most men she knew were either silent as stones or never stopped talking about themselves. Warren asked questions about Jerome, about the mining industry, about Timothy's plans for the future. He seemed genuinely interested in their answers, and Flora found herself opening up to him in a way she rarely did with strangers. "What brought you to Jerome?" Flora asked when there was a lull in the conversation. "Timothy mentioned there is not much call for cattle work in these parts." Warren took a long drink of wine before answering. "I was looking for a change," he said finally. "I have been working cattle since I was 14 years old. Spent the last 5 years in Montana, like I mentioned. Good work, hard work, but lonely. I wanted to see somewhere different, meet new people. When I heard about the mining boom down here in Arizona, I thought I would try my luck." "Are you thinking of becoming a miner?" Timothy asked, sounding surprised. "Maybe, or maybe I will find other work. I am not particular, as long as it is honest." Warren set down his glass and met Flora's eyes across the table. "Truth is, I was ready for a new start. Sometimes a man needs to leave the past behind and begin fresh somewhere else." There was something in his tone, a hint of old pain carefully hidden, that made Flora want to ask more. But she sensed it would be unwelcome, at least for now. Warren Lansing was a man with secrets, she realized. Not dangerous secrets, perhaps, but private ones that he guarded carefully. She could respect that. She had her own sorrows to carry, her own losses that she did not share freely. Well, whatever you decide to do, I hope you will stay in Jerome for a while, she said softly. We could use more men of character around here. Warren's eyes held hers for a long moment, and Flora felt that strange flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. There was something between them, some spark of connection that she could not name but could definitely feel. It both thrilled and frightened her. The meal passed too quickly. Mrs. Rossi brought them pie for dessert, thick slices of apple with cinnamon that melted on the tongue. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as easily as if they had known each other for years rather than a single day. Timothy entertained them with stories of Jerome's more eccentric residents, making Warren laugh with his spot on impressions of the various townsfolk. When they finally emerged from the restaurant into the cold night air, Flora was surprised to see that nearly 3 hours had passed. The sky was brilliantly clear, stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet. Her breath puffed white in the frigid air, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Thank you for dinner, Warren said, settling his hat back on his head. It has been a long time since I enjoyed an evening so much. The pleasure was ours, Timothy assured him. You are welcome at our table any time, Mr. Lansing. Warren, he corrected. Please, just Warren. Mr. Lansing was my father, and we are not on speaking terms. Flora heard the weight behind those words, the history implied but not explained. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but they did not know each other well enough for that. Not yet. Warren, then, she agreed, and you must call me Flora. Miss Harrington sounds so formal. Flora. Warren said her name carefully, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. Flora liked the way it sounded in his deep voice, liked it far more than she probably should. Will you be all right getting home? I could walk with you. That is kind, but we will be fine, Flora assured him. Jerome is safe enough at night, and our cabin is not far. Warren nodded, but he looked reluctant to leave. He stood there in the street, his hands shoved in his pockets against the cold, and Flora found herself equally reluctant to say goodbye. The evening had been wonderful, the best she had experienced in longer than she could remember. She wanted to hold on to it a little longer. Will we see you again? The question was out before she could stop herself. Too eager, too transparent. She felt her cheeks heat despite the cold. I expect so, Warren replied, and was that relief in his voice. Jerome is not such a big town that we can avoid each other, even if we wanted to. Which I do not, he added quickly. Neither do I, Flora said, and smiled. They said their goodbyes and parted ways, Flora and Timothy heading up the steep street toward home, while Warren walked back down toward the livery. Flora resisted the urge to turn and watch him go, though it cost her some effort. Beside her, Timothy was suspiciously quiet. What? She finally asked when the silence stretched too long. Nothing, Timothy said innocently. Just that I have never seen you smile at anyone the way you smile at him. I do not know what you mean. Yes, you do. Timothy bumped her shoulder with his. It is all right, Flora. I like him. He seems like a good man. And after everything we have lost, do not you think you deserve something good? Flora didn't answer right away. Did she deserve something good? Some days she was not sure. Since their father's death, she had been so focused on survival, on keeping a roof over their heads and food on their table, that she had forgotten to think about things like happiness or joy or the possibility of love. Teaching the children of Jerome gave her purpose and satisfaction, but it did not fill the lonely places in her heart. It was just dinner, she said finally. One meal to thank him for saving my life. Do not make it into something it is not. If you say so, Timothy replied. But he was grinning again, and Flora knew he did not believe her any more than she believed herself. That night, Lying in her narrow bed, Flora found it impossible to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Warren's face, heard his voice, felt the ghost of his hands gripping her wrists. He had pulled her from the ice, yes, but she was beginning to fear he had pulled her into something else entirely. Something that felt like falling, but in a completely different way. Something that felt dangerously like the beginning of love. She told herself she was being foolish. She barely knew the man. One rescue and one dinner did not mean anything, did not promise anything. Warren would probably move on soon, finding work elsewhere, and she would be left with nothing but a memory of storm gray eyes and capable hands. But even as she tried to talk herself out of her growing feelings, Flora knew it was too late. Something had shifted yesterday when she plunged through that ice. Warren Lansing had saved more than her life. He had reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of feeling things beyond grief and responsibility. And now that the door had been opened, she did not think she could close it again, even if she wanted to. The next morning dawned bright and bitterly cold. Flora woke to find frost patterns on the inside of her window, delicate as lace. She dressed quickly and made breakfast for Timothy before he left for his job at the assay office, where he worked as a clerk, weighing and testing ore samples. It was respectable work that paid reasonably well, though the hours were long and the owners demanding. Flora's own work did not begin until later. She taught in a small schoolhouse on the edge of town, a one-room building that served children ranging from 6 to 14 years old. She loved teaching, loved the challenge of reaching minds and shaping futures. Her students came from all walks of life, miners' children and merchants' children, some who could barely read and others who devoured every book she placed in their hands. Each one was precious to her. She was preparing her lessons for the day when a knock came at the door. Surprised, she opened it to find Warren standing on her doorstep, his hat in his hands. "Warren," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "What are you doing here?" "I hope I am not intruding," he said, looking uncertain. "I wanted to check on you, make sure you were feeling all right after yesterday." "I am fine," Flora assured him. "Truly. Please come in out of the cold." Warren stepped inside, ducking his head to clear the low doorframe. He looked around the modest cabin with curiosity, but no judgment. Flora tried to see it through his eyes. The worn but clean furniture, the books stacked on every available surface, the sampler her mother had stitched hanging above the fireplace. It was not much, but it was home. "Would you like coffee?" she offered. "I just made a fresh pot." "That would be welcome, thank you." Flora poured them each a cup, and they sat at the small kitchen table. Warren wrapped his large hands around the chipped mug, as if drawing warmth from it. In the morning light streaming through the window, Flora could see details she had missed before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his fingers, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it brushed his collar. "I am glad you are well," Warren said after a moment. "I was worried. Sometimes the effects of cold water exposure do not show up until days later." "How do you know so much about it?" Flora asked. "You mentioned losing a man in Montana. Was that when you learned?" Warren's face darkened. "His name was Charlie Ross. He was young, maybe 19. We were moving cattle across a river when his horse spooked and threw him. The water was spring runoff, cold enough to stop your heart. We pulled him out fast, but then we made the mistake of putting him right next to a roaring fire to warm him up quick. His heart could not take it. He died maybe 20 minutes later, and there was nothing we could do." "I am sorry," Flora said softly. "That must have been terrible." "It was my fault," Warren said, staring into his coffee. "I was the trail boss. It was my responsibility to know better, to keep my men safe. After Charlie died, I studied everything I could find about cold water and hypothermia, talked to doctors, read medical journals, made sure I would never lose another man that way. But it did not bring Charlie back." Flora reached across the table and covered Warren's hand with hers. "It was not your fault. Accidents happen. You cannot blame yourself for not knowing something you had no way of knowing. Warren looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. You really believe that? I do, and I think Charlie would too if he were here. You learned from what happened. You made sure his death meant something by using that knowledge to help others. That is all anyone can do. Warren turned his hand over so their palms met, his fingers curling around hers. The contact sent a jolt through Flora, warmth spreading from where their skin touched. Thank you, he said quietly, for understanding. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, neither seeming to want to break the connection. Flora's heart beat faster, and she wondered if Warren could feel her pulse jumping in her wrist. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, some territory she had never explored before. Finally, reluctantly, Warren pulled his hand back. I should let you get to your work. I just wanted to see how you were. I am glad you came, Flora said, meaning it completely. It is good to see you. Maybe I could stop by again? Warren asked, standing. If that would be all right with you. I would like that very much, Flora replied. She walked him to the door, acutely aware of how small the cabin was, how close they stood in the narrow space. She could smell wood smoke and leather and something that was just uniquely Warren. It made her want to lean closer, to breathe him in. Warren settled his hat on his head and stepped out into the cold. Take care of yourself, Flora. You too, Warren. She watched him walk away down the snowy path, her hand pressed to her chest, where her heart hammered against her ribs. She was in trouble, she realized. Deep trouble. Because whatever she was feeling for Warren Lansing was growing stronger with every moment they spent together, and she had no idea what to do about it. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt both strange and wonderfully natural. Warren found work helping to construct a new shaft at the United Verde mine, laboring alongside men who had been working underground for years. The work was hard and dangerous, but it paid better than the livery, and Warren wanted to save money for his future, whatever that future might hold. He took to stopping by Flora's cabin in the evenings after work, often bringing small gifts, a sack of fresh apples from a peddler passing through town, a book he thought she might enjoy, firewood he had split himself. Flora protested that he should not spend his hard-earned money on them, but Warren insisted. Let me do this, he said simply. It makes me happy. How could she argue with that? Timothy took to Warren immediately, drawn by the older man's quiet strength and evident integrity. Warren treated the boy with respect, listening to his opinions and answering his questions seriously, never talking down to him. In return, Timothy began to look at Warren with something approaching hero worship, though he tried to hide it behind teenage nonchalance. Flora watched the bond forming between them with a mixture of joy and trepidation. She was glad Timothy had a positive male influence in his life again, someone to look up to and learn from. But she also worried about what would happen when Warren inevitably moved on. Because men like Warren were drifters by nature, were they not? They did not stay in one place long, did not put down roots. They came and went like the seasons, leaving nothing behind but memories. Yet Warren showed no signs of leaving. He worked hard at the mine, saved his money, and spent nearly every evening with Flora and Timothy. They talked about everything under the sun, politics and philosophy, books and dreams, the past and the future. Warren spoke little about his own history, though Flora gleaned bits and pieces. His father had been a harsh man, quick with his fists and slow with approval. His mother had died when Warren was 12, leaving him at the mercy of a man who had never wanted children. He had left home at 14 and never looked back. Do you ever regret it? Flora asked one evening as they sat by her fire, Timothy having already gone up to his loft. Leaving so young? Warren considered the question. Sometimes I wonder what might have been different if I had stayed. But mostly no. My father was not a good man, and he would have broken me if I had let him. Leaving was the best decision I ever made. It was brave, Flora said, being that young and striking out on your own. It was necessary, Warren corrected. There is a difference between bravery and survival. Is there? I think sometimes they are the same thing. Warren smiled at her, that slow smile that made her stomach flip. You might be right about that. As January turned to February, the cold began to ease slightly, though snow still fell with regularity. Flora returned to teaching, and her students were fascinated by the story of her rescue from the ice. She downplayed the drama of it, not wanting to frighten the younger children, but she made sure to emphasize the lesson, respect the power of nature, and never underestimate the dangers of cold water. Warren became a familiar sight in Jerome. People greeted him on the street, invited him to join card games at the saloon, asked his opinion on matters both trivial and important. He had a way of fitting in without drawing too much attention to himself, of becoming part of the fabric of the community without losing his essential sense of self. Flora found herself falling deeper with each passing day. She loved the way Warren listened when she talked about her students, genuinely interested in their progress and challenges. She loved how he helped Timothy with difficult mathematical problems, patient and encouraging. She loved the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, his gray eyes warm and full of something she was almost afraid to name. But Warren never pressed for more than friendship. He never tried to kiss her, never made romantic declarations. He was unfailingly respectful, keeping a careful distance even as their emotional intimacy deepened. Flora told herself she should be grateful for his restraint, but in truth, it drove her to distraction. She wanted to know what his lips would feel like against hers. She wanted to feel his arms around her, wanted to press close and hear his heartbeat beneath her ear. One evening in mid-February, as Warren was preparing to leave after another pleasant dinner, Flora made a decision. She could not go on like this, caught in this limbo between friendship and something more. She needed to know if Warren felt what she felt, or if she was imagining the connection between them. Warren, she said as he shrugged into his coat. Wait a moment. He turned, one eyebrow raised in question. What is it? Flora glanced up at the loft, where Timothy had already retired for the night. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Warren's expression grew serious. All right. Why do you come here every evening? Why do you spend all your free time with Timothy and me? Warren was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. You know why? Do I? Flora stepped closer. Because sometimes I think I do, and then I tell myself I am being foolish, reading things into your actions that are not really there. Warren's jaw tightened. You are not being foolish. Then tell me, Flora insisted. Tell me plainly what this is between us. Warren looked torn, conflict written clearly on his face. Flora, He stopped, shook his head. I should not. You do not know me, not really. You do not know where I have been, what I have done. Then tell me, Flora repeated. Help me know you. What if what you learn changes how you feel? What if I am not the man you think I am? Flora reached out and took his hand, holding it firmly. Try me. Warren looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. What she saw in his eyes made her breath catch, longing and fear and hope all mixed together. I have done things I am not proud of, he said quietly. I have made mistakes. I have hurt people even when I did not mean to. I am not some hero from a storybook, Flora. I am just a man trying to be better than he was. That is all any of us can do, Flora replied. Warren, I am not looking for a hero. I am looking for someone real, someone honest, someone who will stand beside me and face whatever comes. She paused, then added softly, someone like you. Warren closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. When he opened them again, they were blazing with intensity. You should send me away. Tell me not to come back. It would be safer for both of us. I do not want safe, Flora said, surprising herself with the truth of it. I have been safe my whole life. I have been careful and responsible and proper. And where has it gotten me? I work myself to the bone, I barely scrape by, and I am lonely. So lonely, Warren. Until you came along and reminded me what it feels like to want something just for myself. Flora. Warren breathed her name like a prayer. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with heartbreaking tenderness. Are you sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Flora whispered. Warren bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, to change her mind. But Flora did not pull away. She rose up on her toes to meet him, and when their lips finally touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if Warren was afraid she might shatter. But Flora pressed closer, her hands coming up to grip his coat, and the kiss deepened. Warren's arms came around her, holding her securely against his chest, and Flora felt safe and wanted and alive in a way she had never experienced before. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Warren rested his forehead against hers. I am in love with you, he said simply. I have been since the moment I pulled you from that lake and saw you fighting to stay alive. I know it is too soon. I know I have no right, but it is the truth. Joy exploded in Flora's chest, so intense it was almost painful. It is not too soon, she assured him, and you have every right. Warren, I love you too. I think I have, since you told me to hold on, since you refused to let me go. Warren kissed her again, deeper this time, with a passion that made Flora's knees weak. She clung to him, drowning in sensation, in the taste and feel and smell of him. This was what she had been missing, what she had been longing for without even knowing it. This connection, this rightness, this sense that she had finally found the other half of herself. A deliberate cough from above made them spring apart. They looked up to see Timothy peering down from the loft, a huge grin on his face. About time, he announced cheerfully. I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever. Flora felt her face flame. Timothy Harrington, you are supposed to be asleep. How could I sleep with all that romantic talk happening down there? Timothy replied, not sounding the least bit sorry. Besides, someone had to make sure Warren was being respectful, which he was, he added approvingly. Warren cleared his throat, looking both embarrassed and amused. I should probably go. Probably, Flora agreed, though she made no move to step away from him. Warren kissed her forehead gently. Tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow, Flora confirmed. After Warren left, Flora stood by the door, her fingers pressed to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. She was in love. After years of focusing solely on survival and responsibility, she was wildly, dizzyingly in love with a cowboy who had pulled her from freezing water and straight into his heart. He is a good man, Timothy said from the loft. He is, Flora agreed softly. Father would have liked him. Flora felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of their father. Yes, I think he would have. So what happens now? Timothy asked. Flora thought about the question. What did happen now? She and Warren loved each other, but love was not a guarantee of anything. There were still so many unknowns, so many challenges ahead. Warren was a drifter with no permanent home. Flora was tied to Jerome by her teaching position and the small life she had built here. How did they bridge that gap? I do not know, she admitted, but we will figure it out together. And for now, that was enough. The following weeks were the happiest of Flora's life. She and Warren courted openly now, walking together through Jerome's steep streets, sharing meals, stealing kisses when Timothy was not watching, and sometimes even when he was. Warren was attentive and affectionate, bringing her wildflowers that somehow survived in the mountain cold, reading to her in the evenings, making her laugh with his dry observations about the world. But as March approached and the worst of winter began to recede, Flora sensed a restlessness in Warren. He grew quieter, more pensive. She would catch him staring out the window with a distant expression, or find him awake late at night, unable to sleep. "What is wrong?" she finally asked one evening when they were alone. "And do not tell me nothing. I know you too well by now." Warren sighed. He took her hand and led her to sit beside him on the small sofa. "I have been thinking about the future," he said. "About what comes next." Flora's stomach tightened with dread. "You are leaving," she said flatly. "No," Warren said quickly. "No, Flora, that is not what I mean at all. But we need to talk about this, about us. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. But I do not know how to make that work." "What do you mean?" Warren gestured around the small cabin. "You have a life here. You have your teaching, your home, your brother. I cannot ask you to give that up for me." "You are not asking, I am offering." Flora gripped his hand tighter. "Warren, wherever you go, I want to go with you." "But what about Timothy? He still has 2 years before he comes of age. You cannot just leave him." "I would never leave Timothy," Flora said firmly. "He comes with us, wherever we go. He is my family. And if you and I are going to be together, he is your family too." Warren looked touched by that. "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe it is simple. We love each other. We want to be together. So we find a way to make it work." Flora paused, then asked carefully, "Unless you do not want the responsibility, Timothy and I are a package deal. If you are not ready for that—" "That is not it," Warren interrupted. "Flora, I would be honored to have Timothy as part of my family. He is a fine young man, and I care about him a great deal. I just do not want you to have regrets. I do not want you to look back someday and resent me for taking you away from the life you built here." Flora cupped Warren's face in her hands, making him look directly at her. "Listen to me very carefully. The life I built here was about survival. It was about doing what needed to be done to keep Timothy and me fed and sheltered. But it was never about happiness. It was never about joy. You have given me both of those things. So no, Warren Lansing, I will never regret choosing you." Warren kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring all his love and relief into the contact. When they finally broke apart, he said, "Marry me." Flora's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "What?" "Marry me," Warren repeated. "I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything. I love you, Flora Harrington. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like. So please, say you will marry me." Flora felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Warren, I will marry you." Warren whooped with joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the small cabin. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. From the loft, Timothy let out a cheer of his own. "I am happy for you," he called down. "Both of you. But if you could keep the celebrating a bit quieter, some of us are trying to sleep up here." "Liar," Flora called back. "You have been listening to every word." "Can you blame me? This is better than any dime novel." Warren laughed and pulled Flora close. "Your brother has a point. We should probably let him get some rest." But Flora did not want to let go, did not want this perfect moment to end. She laid her head against Warren's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. This was real. This was happening. In a matter of weeks, she would be Flora Lansing, married to the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. They were married on the first day of April in a simple ceremony at the small church in Jerome. Flora wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years. The white lace yellowed slightly with age, but still beautiful. Warren wore a new suit purchased for the occasion, looking handsome and uncomfortable in equal measure. Timothy stood as Warren's best man, beaming with pride, while Mrs. Henderson sniffled happily in the front pew. The ceremony was short and sweet. Warren's voice was steady as he made his vows, his gray eyes never leaving Flora's face. Flora's own voice trembled with emotion as she promised to love and honor him for the rest of her days. When the Reverend finally pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed her with such tenderness that half the congregation started crying. The reception was held at the Copper Queen, Mrs. Rossi insisting on providing the food free of charge. "You are family now," she declared, pinching Warren's cheek affectionately. "And family takes care of family." Nearly the whole town turned out to celebrate. Flora danced with Warren, with Timothy, with Dr. Mitchell, and old Pete Morrison, and a dozen other men she had known her whole life. But her eyes always returned to Warren, tall and strong, and hers, her husband. The word filled her with wonder. As the party wound down and evening settled over Jerome, Warren pulled Flora aside. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Something I should have mentioned before, but I wanted to wait until after the wedding to discuss it." Flora felt a flicker of concern. "What is it?" "I have been saving money," Warren said. "Every penny I earned at the mine, I put aside. And I have been talking to some people about opportunities outside of Jerome." "You want to leave?" Flora tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Not leave exactly, but I have been thinking about what you said, about building a life together, and I do not think that life is here in Jerome. This is a mining town, Flora. It will boom, and then it will bust, the way all these places do. I want something more stable for us, for our future children." Flora's hand went instinctively to her belly at the mention of children. It was too early to know for certain, but she thought, hoped, that a new life might already be growing there. "What did you have in mind?" "There is a valley about 30 miles north of here," Warren said. "Good grazing land, year-round water. Not too many people settled there yet. I went and looked at it last week. Flora, it is beautiful. We could start a ranch, raise cattle and horses. It would be hard work, but it would be ours." Flora's mind raced. Leave Jerome? Start fresh somewhere new? It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "What about Timothy? And my teaching?" "Timothy would come with us, of course. As for teaching, you could still do that. Ranch life is not all dawn to dusk work. Once we get established, you could teach the children in the valley. From what I understand, there are several families already settled there with no school for their kids. You could make a real difference." Flora thought about it. Thought about leaving behind the small cabin, the familiar streets of Jerome, the life she had known for so long. Then she thought about waking up each morning beside Warren, building something new together, watching their children grow up on land they owned. The fear began to fade, replaced by excitement. "When would we leave?" she asked. Warren's face lit up with relief and joy. "As soon as you are ready. We could stay here a few more weeks, give you time to finish the school year and say proper goodbyes, then head north when summer comes." "You have really thought this through," Flora marveled. "I want to give you the best life I can," Warren said simply. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer, Flora, and I am going to spend the rest of my days making sure you get it." Flora threw her arms around his neck and kissed him soundly. "I love you," she said fiercely. "And yes, let us do it. Let us start our own ranch and build a life together. It sounds like exactly what I have been dreaming of without even knowing it." They told Timothy the news that evening, and the boy was thrilled. "A ranch? Really? I could learn to work cattle, maybe even break horses." "You could learn whatever you want," Warren assured him. "There is plenty of work for everyone and room to grow." "This is amazing," Timothy said, his eyes shining. "It is like starting completely fresh. New place, new opportunities, new everything." "Except family," Flora said, ruffling his hair affectionately. "That stays the same. We are in this together, the three of us." "The three of us," Timothy agreed, grinning. The next 2 months passed in a blur of preparation. Flora finished out her school year, saying tearful goodbyes to her students and promising to write. Mrs. Henderson threw her a farewell party, pressing a package of carefully wrapped dishes into her hands. "For your new home," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "Every woman needs good dishes." Dr. Mitchell gave them medical supplies and a comprehensive book on home remedies. "You will be far from any doctor out there," he said seriously. "Learn to take care of yourselves." Pete Morrison gave them 2 good horses at a price so low it was practically theft. "You saved one of ours," he told Warren gruffly. "The least I can do is help you get started right." By the time they loaded their wagon in early June, it felt like half of Jerome had contributed something to their new life. They had blankets and tools, dishes and books, seeds for planting and lumber for building. They had hope and determination and love enough to weather any storm. The morning they left, Flora stood on the hill overlooking Jerome and took one last look at the town that had been her home for 22 years. She felt a pang of sadness for what she was leaving behind, for the familiar streets and faces she had known all her life. But when Warren came up beside her and took her hand, the sadness faded. "Ready?" he asked softly. Flora looked at her husband, then back at Timothy waiting by the wagon, then out toward the horizon where their future lay. "Ready," she confirmed. The journey north took 3 days, following rough trails through high desert country. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, all rust-red rocks and twisted juniper trees, vast skies and endless vistas. At night they camped under the stars, and Warren held Flora close while Timothy tended the fire. They talked about their plans, their dreams, the life they would build together. When they finally crested the ridge and looked down into the valley Warren had described, Flora caught her breath. He had not been exaggerating. It was beautiful. A wide, green valley stretched out before them, bisected by a clear, running creek that glinted silver in the sunlight. Trees dotted the landscape, providing shade and windbreak. Mountains rose on all sides, protective and majestic. "There," Warren said, pointing to a spot near the creek. "That is where we will build the house, close enough to the water for easy access, far enough from the creek bed to avoid flooding. The barn can go there, the corral's there. We will need to build fences, but that can come later." Flora could see it all in her mind's eye. The house, simple but sturdy, with a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings, the barn filled with horses and cattle, fields planted with hay and vegetables, and children eventually, running through the grass and learning the ways of the land. "It is perfect," she breathed. They spent that summer working harder than Flora had ever worked in her life. Warren and Timothy cut timber and hauled stone for the foundation. Flora cooked over an open fire and helped where she could, learning skills she had never needed in town. They raised the frame of the house by mid-July, the walls by August. It was rough and unfinished, but it was theirs. Neighbors from other parts of the valley came to help with the raising of the barn, families Flora had not yet met but who welcomed them with open arms. There was the Patterson family with their 6 children, the eldest daughter only a year younger than Timothy. The elderly Johnsons who had been ranching in the valley for 15 years and knew every trick for surviving the harsh winters. The Martinez family who taught Flora how to make tortillas and shared their seeds for the kitchen garden. By the time autumn arrived, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson, the ranch was taking shape. They had a house, a barn, a small herd of cattle purchased with Warren's savings, and 3 good horses. Flora had started teaching lessons twice a week for the valley children, gathering them in the Pattersons' large kitchen and working through arithmetic and reading with eager students. And Flora's suspicions from the wedding day had proven correct. She was pregnant, her belly just beginning to round with the new life growing inside. Warren was beside himself with joy, hovering over her with such concern that Flora finally had to tell him she was not made of glass. "I know," he said, kissing her temple, "but you are carrying our child." "Our child, Flora." "How can I not worry?" "By trusting that I know my own body," Flora replied gently. and by remembering that women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine. But Warren still worried, and Flora secretly loved him for it. It felt good to be cherished, to be cared for with such devotion. After so many years of being the strong one, the responsible one, it was a relief to lean on someone else's strength for a change. Winter came early to the valley that year, snow falling in late October and not letting up until March. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, cut off from the rest of the valley and the wider world beyond. But Flora did not mind. She had everything she needed right here. Warren and Timothy, the warmth of their home, the growing life in her belly. She gave birth on a cold March morning, with Warren holding her hand and Mrs. Johnson serving as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, but when Flora finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. Warren laid their son in her arms, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Warren whispered in awe. "Flora, he is absolutely perfect." Their son had Warren's dark hair and Flora's green eyes, and from the first moment, he owned their hearts completely. They named him William, after Warren's middle name, and called him Will. Timothy was smitten with his nephew, declaring himself the best uncle in the entire territory. As Flora held her newborn son and looked around at the family gathered in their home, she felt a peace deeper than anything she had known before. This was what she had been searching for all her life without knowing it. Not just love, though she had that in abundance. Not just security, though they had built that together. But belonging, purpose, a place in the world that was uniquely hers. The years that followed were not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and lean times. Timothy eventually left to start his own ranch on the far side of the valley, though he visited often and remained close with Flora and Warren. More children came, a daughter named Sarah 2 years after Will, then another son they called James, and finally twin girls, Emma and Elizabeth, who arrived during a thunderstorm and came out screaming their displeasure at the world. Warren proved to be an excellent rancher and an even better father. He taught his children to ride and rope, to respect the land and the animals in their care. He taught them to be honest and fair, to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. And he loved Flora with a constancy that never wavered, through good times and bad, through sickness and health, just as they had promised each other in that small church in Jerome. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Warren and Flora stood on the porch of their house, watching the sunset over the mountains. Their children were grown now, or nearly so. Will was courting the Pattersons' youngest daughter. Sarah was away at a teaching college in Phoenix, following in her mother's footsteps. James worked the ranch alongside Warren, a natural cattleman with his father's quiet strength. The twins at 14 were still home, but growing up faster than Flora liked to think about. "Do you ever regret it?" Warren asked, his arm around Flora's waist. "Leaving Jerome? Giving up your teaching to come out here?" Flora leaned into her husband's embrace and thought about the question. Did she regret anything? She had worked harder in these 20 years than in all the years before combined. She had buried a stillborn daughter between Sarah and James, a grief that still sometimes caught her by surprise. She had endured brutal winters and scorching summers, seen droughts kill their cattle and floods wash away their fences. She had worried about money, about her children's futures, about whether they would make it through another harsh season. But she had also known joy beyond measure. She had watched her children grow and thrive in this beautiful valley. She had built a life with a man who loved her more than she ever dreamed possible. She had created a home not just for her family, but for anyone who needed it, offering shelter and meals to travelers passing through, teaching children whose families lived too far from any town to attend a proper school. "No," she said firmly, "I have never regretted any of it. Not for a single moment." Warren kissed the top of her head. "You know what I think about sometimes? That day at the lake, the sound of the ice cracking, The look on your face when you went under. Flora shuddered, even after all these years. I try not to think about it too much. It still frightens me. Me too, Warren admitted. Because if I had been even a minute later, if I had not been walking by that lake right at that moment, you would have died, and I would have lost you before I ever knew you existed. That thought keeps me up at night sometimes. But you were there, Flora said, turning to face him. You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there. Some people would call that fate, others would call it providence. I just call it the best luck of my entire life. Mine too, Warren said. He cupped her face in his hands, the same way he had that first night they kissed. I love you, Flora Lansing. More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow. Flora smiled at the familiar words, something Warren said to her often. I love you too. Always? They kissed as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. From inside the house, they could hear their children laughing, the sounds of dinner being prepared, the comfortable chaos of family life. This was their legacy, Flora thought. Not just the ranch they had built or the cattle they raised, but this love they had created together, this family, this life. All because a foolish young woman had ventured out onto thin ice and a brave cowboy had reached in to pull her out, blue and half frozen, but still fighting to live. She had been dying that day, sinking into cold darkness. But Warren had given her more than rescue. He had given her a reason to keep fighting, a future worth living for. And in return, she had given him a home, a family, a place where he belonged at last. Two people who might have been strangers, passing in the night without ever meeting. Instead, fate or luck or divine intervention had brought them together in the most dramatic way possible. And from that moment of crisis and cold water and desperate courage, love had bloomed, the kind of love that endured through decades, through trials and triumphs, through everything life could throw at them. Warren and Flora eventually grew old together, their hair turning silver, their steps growing slower. But their love never diminished. They sat on their porch on warm summer evenings, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play in the yard. They told stories of the old days, of Jerome and frozen lakes, and the moment their eyes first met. Tell us again how Grandpa saved you, the grandchildren would beg, and Flora would smile and begin the tale. How she had been falling through ice into freezing water, how she had felt herself slipping away, and how a cowboy had appeared like something from a dream, reaching into that icy water without hesitation, pulling her out blue and half dead, but still alive, still fighting. And then what happened? The youngest grandchildren would ask, though they had heard the story 100 times. And then he saved me again, Flora would say, looking at Warren with eyes that still sparkled with love after all these years. Every single day after that, he saved me, with his kindness, his strength, his love. He pulled me out of the ice that day, but he spent the rest of his life pulling me toward joy. Warren would kiss her hand and add his own ending to the story. But she saved me right back. I was drifting before I met your grandmother, just moving from place to place without purpose. And she gave me a home. She gave me everything that matters. The grandchildren would sigh with the satisfaction, the romance of it never growing old, no matter how many times they heard it. And Flora and Warren would exchange a knowing look, remembering not just the drama of that first meeting, but all the quiet moments after, the thousands of small choices they had made to keep choosing each other, to keep building their life together, to keep their love strong and vital, even when times were hard. When Warren finally passed away in his sleep at the age of 78, Flora was beside him, holding his hand as she had held it through 51 years of marriage. She mourned him deeply, achingly, but she did not regret a single moment they had shared. He had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, and she had given him the same. Flora lived another 5 years after Warren's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She never remarried, never wanted to. She had been blessed with a love that most people never found even once. To try to recreate it would have been impossible. On her final day, lying in the bed she had shared with Warren for so many years, Flora was visited by all her living children. They gathered around her, holding her hands, telling her how much they loved her. And as she felt herself slipping away, the pain in her old body finally easing, Flora was not afraid. She thought of that day at the lake, of falling through ice into freezing water, of the cold and the darkness and the fear. And then she thought of Warren's hands gripping her wrists, strong and sure, pulling her back toward the light. Hold on, he had told her all those years ago, and she had held on, to him and to life and to the love they had built together. Now, as she took her last breath, surrounded by the family they had created, Flora let go at last. And if anyone had been looking closely, they would have seen her smile as she went, as if someone was reaching for her hand once more, pulling her toward a different kind of light. The ranch continued after Flora's death, passed down through generations of Lansings who worked the land and carried on the legacy of love and hard work that Warren and Flora had established. The story of the frozen lake and the cowboy's rescue became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But those who had known Warren and Flora personally knew that no embellishment was needed. Their love story was extraordinary all on its own. Two people from different backgrounds, brought together by chance and courage and the simple act of one person refusing to let another person die. From that moment of crisis had sprung a lifetime of joy, a family that spanned generations, a love that became the foundation of everything that came after. And on winter days, when ice formed on the creek that ran through the valley, the Lansing children would stand at the edge and remember the foolish young teacher who ventured onto thin ice. Remember the brave cowboy who did not hesitate to reach into freezing water. Remember how from that moment of fear and cold and desperate courage, the greatest love story their family had ever known had begun. Flora had been falling through ice into freezing water, sinking toward death and darkness. Warren had reached in and pulled her out, blue and barely breathing, but alive. And in that moment, everything changed. Two lives were joined, setting in motion a chain of events that would create a family, a legacy, a love that endured beyond death itself. Some might say it was just luck that Warren happened to be walking by that lake at exactly the right moment. Others might call it divine providence. But Flora and Warren had always believed it was something simpler and more profound than either. It was meant to be. They were meant to find each other, meant to save each other, meant to build a life together in that beautiful valley surrounded by mountains and sky. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.